Right, hello AS again. Welcome to your self-report and pilot studies video. Um, so we're going to have a quick look at I think it's just two bits of key terminology. Here we've got social desirability bias, which is, I think we've touched on this possibly in class, which is the idea that people will give what they think the socially acceptable answer is. And the example here is the rule of three related to sexual partners. You could look at psychology today, not necessarily the most reliable or valid kind of source, but quite interesting sometimes. So rule of three is the idea that, and it's very, very stereotypical and old-fashioned idea, but it's a really good way of demonstrating social desirability bias, is that if you ever ask somebody how many sexual partners they've had, depending on which gender they are. If they are men, then you should divide the number they give you by 3 to get the true number, and if they are female, you should times the number by 3 to get the true number. And that links with the idea of sociability desire of bias and the old-fashioned idea that it's encouraged for men to be promiscuous, to have lots of sexual partners. It's seen as socially desirable, socially acceptable to do that, whereas it's socially frowned upon for women to have multiple sexual partners as well. As I said, very antiquated concept, but a really good example. The other one would be possibly about aggression. So social desirability bias might mean that men, when they complete a questionnaire or answer an interview on aggression, would overemphasize how aggressive they are, because in society it's accepted or seen as a positive thing if men are aggressive, whereas when women appear aggressive, it's not such a good thing, so women would underestimate or under kind of describe how aggressive they are. Oh no, me never get cross at all, never get aggressive. And then interviewer bias is where they seek out information which supports their hypothesis, and another one for this is confirmation bias, but we're thinking particularly about interviewers here. So they could do lots of different things, a bit like observer or experimenter effect. So when interviewers ask a question about, and they want people to share more information, or kind of, for example, if they were looking at drugs and they were interviewing people, and they knew that this person was in the experimental group, they were taking the drug. When you asked about side effects, you'd sit there, and you'd keep just waiting and waiting while they shared more side effects, because you'd expect them to have lots. When they're in the placebo, you'd ask them about side effects, and they go, oh no, I can't think of any. You go, right, okay, moving on. Whereas in the experimental condition, you go, oh, I can't think of any, and they go, sure? Or they just wait for a moment, a little bit longer, and if you give someone long enough, they'll always be able to think of something, or they'll know they've not given quite the right answer and share more information. Or they could seek out to ask certain questions to acquire the information that they want. There are 4 types of bias, interview bias, and how to eliminate them there. You can have a look in a bit more detail. This will be particularly useful if you're thinking of studying psychology at university, or if you're going for the higher grades in the exam as well. Self-report, directly from the mark scheme, where the participant gives information to the researcher, provides details of their own feelings, thoughts and behaviours. So it's self-report, which is a key term you need to know. There are 2 types, questionnaires and interviews, and then you'll see there are 2 types of each of those. The participant gives information to the researcher about their experiences, feelings, thoughts, behaviours. So it's the researcher is providing the information is the important part. In questionnaires, you've got open and closed questions. In a closed question, you must, in the exam, if you're asked to write one, include the little options or the boxes below. So you need to write the closed question, and then you need to write box for yes, box for no, or box 1 to 5, 6 to 10, and so on. And then interviews are structured and unstructured. So you all know about open and closed questions, and we focus particularly on questionnaires here, and open and closed. Interviews at this level, we acknowledge that they could be either. Open questions allow you to answer freely anything that, or encourage a more open and free answer. I know you've looked at this with Andy, so for example, how are you? Whereas closed questions, are you feeling okay? You can only give a yes or a no answer really to those, or a limited range of answers. And then interviews got structured and unstructured. Structured is essentially a scripted interview, so you've got a list of questions that you follow and you ask them. Unstructured is where you don't have any questions at all. You just kind of the interview just flows as it goes along. So one question, after one question and the kind of answers that they give, they generate another one. So structured one, you would have a list, a script where you ask the questions. Unstructured, you would just flow from question to question. There is also semi-structured, which you don't need to know for the spec, but it's a useful one to be aware of because it's probably one of the better ones. You have a couple of questions to start with, or a couple of questions that you're going to ask, but then also you are allowed to deviate from that. So if they say something interesting, you can say, oh, tell me a bit more about that, or you can ask another question about something else as well. What I would like you to do now is go into the booklet, and I'd like you to look at the questionnaire in your flipped learning booklet and tell me any problems with it. So there are hundreds and hundreds of different problems with this terrible, terrible questionnaire. One of the things that you do need to be aware of in the exam is questionnaire construction. So that means, can you write a questionnaire? Can you provide information or advice about how to? So one of the questions could be, explain how you would construct a questionnaire. So what we're going to do is look at all the mistakes, and then in session we're going to look at how you would avoid those mistakes. So outside of class, it's absolutely vital in your blended learning, in your flipped learning, you need to look at that booklet, and you need to do everything. You need to point out every single problem you can think of with that questionnaire, and there should be absolutely loads. Okay. And that's it really. So for interviews and questionnaires for the AO1, and then for the AO3, the evaluation, what I'd like, if you see those brackets there where it says 3, that is how many self-report methods on your page in front of you. So in front of you, on your evaluation page, there are so many evaluation points mentioned. The reason I'm pausing is because I think it should be more than that. Just 1 second. Nope, I should always trust myself. I was right the first time. 3 of those listed on that sheet that you are looking at near the top. I'll give you a bit of a clue. These evaluation points apply to them either as strengths or weaknesses. So in 3 of the questionnaire, interview, self-report, whatever boxes, you need to include this as either a strength or a weakness. So one of the strengths is it gives us insights and motivation. So because we're asking the participants, why did you do this, or what do you think of this? It's not like an observation where we just have to assume we can see the behaviour and assume what they were motivated by. We know why they do certain things. We know why they're motivated. Social desirability bias we've already discussed, so it's the idea that you can give socially acceptable answers. So of course that's a problem of questionnaires and interviews and any self-report really, that you can answer however you want, so you can be affected by social desirability bias in a way that you wouldn't in observations, you are we see how you would behave. We don't have to rely on that, so it can't be affected by social desirability bias. But in questionnaires and interviews, self-report in general, you can give socially acceptable answers. It's also really important. Another problem with it is that it requires self-awareness. So you need to be aware. You need to be able to reflect on your behaviour. So would you be aggressive in this kind of situation? I'll have to think about that one and decide. And then if you're very self-aware, you'll be able to be quite honest. Whereas if you're not self-aware, you go, oh no, I'm never aggressive at all. Whereas if it's an observation, we'd find you were throwing things and kicking things and all that kind of stuff. So you need to understand, have a self-awareness of your own behaviour. Okay. And then the next 2 apply to just 2 of the self-report methods that are on that list. So they are either very, very easy to access a large sample, which allows us to access population validity, or it is very difficult to access a large sample because it's so difficult to put in place and to conduct. So which one of the next ones on the list do you think questionnaires and interviews, what's the strength, which one is it easy to get a large sample, which one would it take more time, which one would be more difficult because it's more time consuming. The same with can you or can't you clarify questions and information. So if you're in one of these self-report methods, can you say, sorry, can you just explain that question to me that you've just asked me please? Or the interviewer can say, can you just explain what you mean by what you've said in that answer there, or can you just say that a bit more clearly? Whereas in other things you think, what does that question mean? I don't even know, and you've not got anyone there to ask to kind of clarify. Or so think about, obviously outside of class when that happens, you think, no, I haven't got a clue what that teacher wants me to do for homework. Whereas when you're in the session, you can go, excuse me, can you just explain what we need to do? And also the same thing, if you write an answer in an assessment where I can't speak to you about it, I can read it and think, what on earth is that student talking about? Whereas when they're in class and they say something I'm not quite sure, I say, I think you're along the right lines, can you tell me a bit more about that? And they would tell me a bit more. So have a think about which 2 of those sampling methods, so which one's easy, which one's difficult, which one can and which one you can't clarify information. Same thing again with open and closed, structured and unstructured. So thinking about these four, which of these apply to which. So 2 boxes should have that it either does or doesn't offer more richness in detail, and 2 boxes would say it's difficult or easy to identify patterns and compare between groups and conditions. So one would say it was difficult, one would say it would be easy, one does offer more richness in detail and one doesn't, and then one is easy to standardize and replicate, so it's exactly the same every time, you can keep it the same, and one is difficult to standardize and replicate, so you have 2 boxes with either easy or difficult in, and then you can or can't collect more detail if participants say something interesting. So in some you can say, oh, just tell me a little bit more about that, that's quite interesting. In the other one, even, no matter how interesting it is what they say, you have a structure that you need to fit to, so you need to move on. So, and again, they should go in 2 boxes, one as can and one as can't. And we will work through those more in class, but I'd like everyone to be prepared with that information. And then very briefly, we're going to look at pilot studies. So I am going to give you another worksheet where you make notes on pilot studies. A pilot study directly from the mark scheme is a small scale study carried out before the main research. So in this case, if I was going to hand out a questionnaire, before I handed out that questionnaire, if I'm going to hand it out to 2,000 people, which should help you with your evaluation, because of course with a questionnaire you can hand it out to 2,000 people, whereas with an interview that is much more difficult to get through 2,000 people, very expensive, very time consuming. If you've got the budget to get through 2,000 people in an interview, think how many millions of questionnaires you could send out. So it's a pilot study, it's a small scale study. So they trial, so I'd get people to trial the questionnaires, talk to me about, and then I'd ask their opinions about them. They'd say, oh, this question wasn't very clear, I didn't really understand this, there wasn't enough space to write this answer, all of those things. And it's exactly the same with absolutely everything. It's not just self-report, it is everything that we do pilot studies on. So if I'm going to do an experiment, you would run a small scale study of that first. It allows you to identify flaws and problems in the studies, and it allows the researcher to try it out and make adjustments, saving time and money. So you can try it out on, say you're going to do an experiment on 200 people, you try it out on 10 or 20 first, and if anything goes wrong, it doesn't matter too much because you can make changes and you won't have wasted a great deal of money. Whereas if you do it on 200 people and then go, well, those results were useless, then it's not as helpful. Kind of things that you'd be looking for: check equipment is working, check behavioural categories operationalised, check the standardised instructions are clear, make sure timings are adequate, ask participants about their experiences. So at the end of the session you can say, could you just tell me a bit about your experience, what was this like, what was this like, well, I didn't really understand this, I was quite confident on this, it became quite clear halfway through what your aim was, so I changed my behaviour. All of those things, and you can check that the testing materials are appropriate. So we do have something called the ceiling and the floor effect. So the ceiling effect is when the test is so easy that everybody aces it, no matter whether you've had caffeine or not had caffeine, whatever it might be. It's not helpful because everybody gets full or nearly full marks. And the floor effect is when the experiment is so difficult, the test is so difficult, so if it's an IQ test, that nobody achieves any marks or hardly any. It's too hard for anyone to do, so it doesn't really tell us anything. So you want to make sure that that test is nicely in the middle, so it is achievable, but you can see whether some people do better than others, rather than everyone doing brilliantly or everyone doing terribly. It is not, and this is absolutely vital, every single year I get somebody telling me that it is this. It is not this. You are not checking that you will get the results that you want. Technically, if you want to think about pilot studies like this, you would go through the whole process and at the end you'd have a conversation with the participants. At no point would you look at your results even. Just imagine you don't even look at them. Sometimes you need to, because obviously you need to work out whether there's a ceiling or a floor effect, but you're not checking to get the results you want. You would certainly not abandon a study if you did a pilot and went, well, I didn't want to find that there was no difference between caffeine and no caffeine. I wanted to find there was a difference. That is bias. You do not check that you get the results that you want. You check that, are there any flaws in the study? You check that you need to make any adjustments, and that is it. Okay. Right, so make sure you fill in that additional worksheet if I handed it out in session. Make sure you've worked through all of the booklet, including the questionnaires, and if you can bring that with you to your last session before half term with me. Some of you won't have a session on the Friday because of CPD week, but we'll make a plan for that. Okay, thank you very much.